We are recording. And now I am going to, after we take a look at who our wonderful moderator and speakers are, I'm going to turn it over to Anna Miti from the Choice Agenda. And many thanks to our speakers, Dr. Thumbi, Dr. Gabriela, and the wonderful Adaobi Lisa. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn it over to Anna. Thank you so much, Anna, zooming in from Harare today.
Thank you so much. And thanks, of course, to the wonderful Jim Pickett, the co-moderator of the TCA, and also, of course, the DJ Jimbali. Wonderful music selection as usual. Always love it. My name is Anna Miti, as Jim said, from Harare, Zimbabwe. I'm a former AVAC fellow and also co-moderator of the TCA. I'm absolutely living for the song Live Your Life by Rihanna and T.I. And I think this all we can do during these times. You know how it is with everything that has been going on. Thank you so much to everyone who joined. And I know that because of the 163 people registered, we might be having some people who will be coming a little bit later. I just want to give a special shout out to all the AVAC, former AVAC fellows that I've seen that have already joined, and also the AVAC, IAS Advocacy for Cure Academy fellows that I've also seen that have joined, and those that will join later. Let me go ahead and introduce our speakers today, who I'm very, very grateful for because they are all very, very busy people. And I'm just going to give them a minute to just say hi, starting off with Professor Ndung'u, who is the Director for Basic and Translational Science at the Africa Health Research Institute, ARI. Prof. Ndung'u, very good afternoon to you and a warm welcome. Let me just say hi.
Thank you, Anna, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussions today.
Great stuff. I also want to say a very good afternoon to Dr. Gabriela Cromhout. She was named one of the Mail and Guardian's 200 Young South Africans for 2025. I have had the privilege to see her in what I would call her natural habitat, where she was doing research for the fresh cohort. And I was one of the people who were at the IAS Advocacy for Cure Academy. And we actually had a trip to see that cohort, and it was very lovely to see her. And she is actually in the middle of writing a thesis for doctoral research. So we are very grateful to have you around. Dr. Gabriela, say hi.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for having me, Anna and Jim. It's really a privilege to be here and yeah, to engage with everyone who's on this call. So I'm really excited. I'm actually joining you from my clinic in Durban today. So if there are funny noises in the background, that's just the nature of working in healthcare. And so I'm really excited to be on this webinar with you all. Thank you.
All right. Welcome. And also, finally, Adaobi Olisa, Route to Rise. She's also a former IS HIV Vaccine Advocacy Academy Fellow and Advocacy for Cure Academy Fellow as well. And she's done quite a lot of things. And I'm sure you will see by her vivacious presentation and the vivacious nature. Adaobi, thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Hi, Jim, Gabby, Professor Thumbi, Anna. It's great to be here with everyone today. Looking forward to an exciting session. Thank you.
Very packed and something that is I do believe is a very important topic, which is looking at HIV cure research in Africa. And I think this comes from a whole lot of background where we've had all these cures so far and all the researches that we've been presented about a potential cure. We've seen all the patients, the Berlin patient, all these other patients that have been presented as being in remission or cured coming from elsewhere. And I think the next frontier really should be HIV research in Africa. And with that, I'll go straight ahead to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker's presentation, Professor Thumbi Ndung'u. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I'm going to try and share my, let me see if I can do that. I hope that you can see my presentation.
You can see your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to talk about advances in HIV cure research in Africa and what we actually need to do in order to accelerate HIV cure research in Africa. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. But we just celebrated World AIDS Day a couple of days ago, and I thought that it is good to start with an appreciation of the tremendous progress that we have made in terms of effective HIV prevention strategies. So we have a whole host of choices for HIV prevention, obviously behavioral interventions, condoms, male circumcision, treatment of sexually transmitted infections, but in particular, I think the best way to prevent HIV is treatment of people who are living with HIV so that their viral load can be undetectable. And if they have undetectable viral load, they will not be able to transmit that virus to somebody else. And of course, we are also all aware about pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is another big revolution in the HIV prevention field because pre-exposure prophylaxis can reduce transmission to almost zero. And we have also made a lot of progress in terms of treatment. I think most of you will be familiar with the fact that it used to be very difficult to treat HIV. This was how treatment looked like in, I hope I can, let me see if I can use a highlighter here. Actually, I'm not sure that I know how to do that. Let's see. Yeah. In 1996, that's how treatment looked like. One had to take about 30 pills a day. And now all you need to do is to take a single pill. And so there's been a revolution, really. And in addition, of course, we are now talking about long-acting antiretrovirals for HIV treatment, which is what is depicted here, but is also in this paper published in Lancet Infectious Diseases that show that cabotegravir and riperidone can be used as an injection to treat people with HIV. And of course, it is non-inferior to the current one pill treatment. So very good news in terms of long-acting antiretrovirals. But it's not just antiretrovirals for treatment of people living with HIV, it's also for prevention of HIV. And again, we know that there's now available in some countries lenacapavir, which has been shown in this clinical trial here to be 100% effective in terms of preventing transmission. And this is something that you can take as an injection. It lasts for 6 months. So again, very, very effective in terms of preventing HIV transmission. And I think we need to celebrate these innovations and this progress in HIV prevention. But we also need to recognize that HIV continues to be a big public health challenge, particularly in some communities. And this is data from KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa. And I usually like to draw people to this age group of 25 to 44 years old, where you can see that about 40% of men and 60% of women in Mkanyakunde district in KwaZulu-Natal are living with HIV. So if we don't develop a cure for HIV, it means that these people will have to be on antiretroviral therapy for the rest of their lives. And I think it would be really, really fantastic if we can manage to cure people of HIV or allow them to be able to control the virus without antiretroviral therapy for a long time so that they don't have to take antiretroviral medication all the time. But excuse me. It's not just in KwaZulu-Natal. We also know that although the number of new HIV infections globally has been going down, we missed the target for 2025 because we had about 3 times the number of new infections to what the UNAIDS had set as a target. We had about 1.3 million new infections as opposed to about 500, which would be the target that if we are to achieve epidemic control of HIV by the year 2030. So we need to do much more in terms of HIV prevention. We need to do much more in terms of HIV treatment. But I think we also need to start thinking very seriously about HIV cure and how we can make HIV cure a possibility. And we know that this is possible. First of all, we know that the reason that it is so difficult to cure HIV is because of this reservoir of immune cells that continue to harbor HIV even when somebody is on fully suppressive antiretroviral therapy. And we know that through gene therapy, or transplant, it is possible to completely eradicate HIV, or what we call a classical cure, where the virus gets completely eradicated from the body. And we know that that has happened for a few number of people. And those people had to undergo gene therapy or bone marrow transplants, which are not very easy. They cannot be rolled out as a public health strategy because they are not safe, but they're also very, very expensive. The other approach that scientists have been talking about is what we call remission. And in remission, what you do is that you give antiretroviral therapy to reduce the size of the reservoir. So you don't completely eliminate the reservoir, you just reduce it. But then you reduce it to such an extent that you can then control it with the immune system so that the person does not need antiretroviral therapy to control the virus to undetectable levels. So we know that this is also possible because there are a number of studies that have now been done that shows that remission is possible, although we don't know exactly what it is that leads to this remission, and we don't have enough number of people that go into remission after antiretroviral therapy is interrupted for us to really be able to roll out that strategy. But I just wanted to say that there are many approaches that are being attempted for HIV cure. So you can target the HIV reservoir itself. You can boost the immune system through immunotherapy. And finally, there is cell or gene therapy that can be used either to deliver antiviral agents or to deliver immunological interventions that can then control the virus. And then there is a combination of all these approaches. So there are many multiple approaches. So I don't want people to go out with the impression that there is only one or two approaches that are being attempted. There are very many approaches that scientists are thinking about. And the hope is that one of these approaches or a combination of these approaches will eventually lead to a cure for HIV. And of course, the ultimate way to cure HIV would be to get rid of HIV from the immune cells in which it hides. So this would be gene therapy. And again, here, there has been a lot of innovations in terms of ways to deliver gene therapies to enhance anti-HIV immune responses or to protect uninfected cells so that they become resistant to HIV, for example, by removing the CCR5 gene, because the HIV uses CCR5 to enter cells. So if you're able to edit the cells so that they don't express CCR5, the cells can become resistant to HIV. And then, of course, there are also strategies being attempted to directly eliminate the virus itself from where it is integrated within immune cells so that the person can then live a healthy life without the risk of HIV rebound once antiretroviral therapy is interrupted. However, all these gene therapies, as I mentioned earlier, are very expensive and they require very significant infrastructure in order to deliver them. And so we are not at a stage at the moment where these innovations can actually be rolled out for the general public. But the hope is that with more research, there will be innovation in this area and that we may one day be able to completely eradicate HIV. So I just want to pivot and talk about the fresh cohort, which is a study that we have been doing here in South Africa. This cohort, we have been following it since 2012. And what this cohort does is that we combine social good and discovery science. What do I mean? So there are two components to the fresh cohort. The first thing is that we try to empower young women who are not living with HIV so that they can get skills, job skills for 9 months. So for example, we teach them how to use computers. And the goal is that after these 9 months, they can go back, they can go to work, so get a work placement or return to school or start a small business. But this particular program also incorporates twice weekly testing, HIV RNA testing by a finger prick blood draw. And the idea here is to try and detect acute HIV infection because these are young women who are obviously sexually active. They are continuing with their normal lives as they attend this curriculum. And so some of them do get exposed to HIV, and some of them do acquire HIV infection when they are on this program. And so in order for us to detect acute HIV infection, we test them with HIV RNA testing twice a week. And then we take those samples and we do discovery research on HIV prevention, pathogenesis, and HIV cure. And that we do in the laboratory. So this cohort has been very informative for both HIV prevention, but also for HIV cure strategies. And recently, we just completed a clinical trial within this cohort where we took women who acquired HIV infection in the cohort and started antiretroviral therapy immediately after detection of acute HIV infection. So we asked them to, we offered them a combination of broadly neutralizing antibodies, 2 broadly neutralizing antibodies, but we also gave them an immunomodulatory drug called vasotalamide, or a toll-like receptor 7 agonist. And we gave them 10 doses of that immunomodulatory drug in addition to the broadly neutralizing antibodies. Then we asked them to interrupt antiretroviral treatment. And the idea was to see how long it takes for the virus to rebound. But we also, of course, were interested in the safety of this particular regimen. So the primary endpoints were safety as well as time to viral rebound. How long does it take for the virus to rebound if you ask people to interrupt treatment after this intervention? And of course, we do close monitoring of viral load every week until we see a rebound. And this was what we call a set point study, cure study. So we allowed the viral load to go up to more than 1,000 copies for 8 consecutive weeks. But if the viral load went up above 100,000, we then put the person on antiretroviral therapy. We also monitored the CD4 counts, and if the CD4 counts fell below 350, we reinitiated antiretroviral treatment, although nobody had to reinitiate treatment because of the CD4 counts falling below 350. Also, if the person became pregnant or the participant requested, then we would also put them on antiretroviral therapy. And these are the results of this clinical trial. It was a very small clinical trial of 20 people, and 7 out of 20 participants rebounded within 16 weeks of interrupting antiretroviral therapy. And we call those early ART restart group because they rebounded very quickly. And then we had a second group of participants, again, 7 out of 20. Those individuals rebounded after between 16 weeks and 44 weeks. And they had to restart antiretroviral therapy. And that's when we are expecting the antibodies that we had given them to start waning and disappear from the body. But then we had 6 participants who were able to control the virus and did not require to restart antiretroviral therapy according to the predetermined criteria that we had set by 44 weeks. And in fact, 4 out of these 20 participants were completely controlling the virus at 55 weeks of antiretroviral therapy interruption. That is after about 1 year. They were completely controlling the virus at undetectable levels. And so we continued to follow those 4 participants even after the study ended. So this was the first HIV cure trial in Africa, and it demonstrates that these kinds of complex cure studies can be done in a resource-limited settings, and we hope that more studies of this nature can be done on the African continent because of the fact that this is where we have the highest burden of HIV. We also found that the treatment was well tolerated, so the drugs were well tolerated. And as I mentioned, 20% of participants achieved durable ART-free control. This regimen is not a cure because only 20% of individuals were able to control. And therefore, this is not something that we can roll out widely, but we are doing a lot of laboratory studies that we hope are going to inform future interventions. And we also have been doing a lot of social behavioral research in collaboration with my colleague Chris Dong, as well as Karin Dubé, on social behavioral research in order to shape future ATI implementation studies in Africa. And of course, this study involved a lot of community engagement. And so I hope that this kind of work can be done in Africa. So in my few remaining minutes, I just wanted to say that in order for us to accelerate HIV cure research in Africa, we need more research. And this research needs to be in discovery, it needs to be clinical research, clinical trials, as well as social behavioral research. We need to continue to develop infrastructure. Doing this kind of work is difficult and it requires advanced clinical as well as laboratory infrastructure. So this is needed. We need a community engagement. This kind of work cannot be done without good collaboration between the researchers and people living with HIV, as well as advocates and the community in general. And so we need community engagement. And of course, we need to build the capacity of the next generation of researchers and advocates in order for this work to continue in Africa. So in order for us to support this kind of work, we are just in HIV research excellence. This network involves many countries in Africa, but the idea is to do research and innovation on HIV cure research, as well as develop leadership in this area. And we have trained more than 140 scientists, African scientists. We have had more than 380 publications, and we have also helped some young investigators to become independent investigators. And Sante contributed to the drafting of updated international recommendations for ATI trials. So we convened a group of advocates as well as scientists in Nairobi last year to discuss how we can safely do this analytical treatment interruption studies in Africa. And we have some guidelines that we have developed that will soon be published in Lancet HIV, hopefully. And then the other initiative that I wanted to talk about was the Africa HIV Cure Consortium. This is where many organizations have come together and are advocating for HIV cure research, as well as advocating and working with the people living with HIV and other stakeholders, clinicians, governments, so that we can put HIV cure agenda right on the forefront of the work that we are doing in Africa. So this consortium is promoting African leadership. It aims to have a coordinated action across research advocacy. It hopes to be sustainable over the long term so that we can promote this kind of work in Africa. And we have already had quite a number of early wins where we have organized some meetings. And hopefully you can be part of this consortium so that we can all work together to promote HIV cure research agenda in Africa. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge the many organizations that are involved in all these efforts, and in particular, the study participants in the FRESH cohort and the people that I work with at the HPP and at the FRESH cohort, including my colleague Krista Dong, who is a co-PI on the FRESH clinical trial. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And that's quite inspiring work. And I think it's one of those research that's very unique in the fact that they do combine, the social aspect of it, which is quite important. I know that there are some people who have already sent in their questions. We'll be monitoring to see if they've been answered. But feel free to also put some questions in the chat, and we'll also have a question and answer session later. But just before we get to Dr. Gabriela's presentation, I think maybe you can just, Prof. Thumbi, if you can just answer this one. I don't know if you can, but it says, it's from Isaiah, who says, I have a question. If someone gets an HIV cure and probably fight, will he or she be given reward, and which place can he or she tell or who they tell?
Anna, you broke up quite a bit, so I don't know whether it's my
Okay,
line or yours.
it's probably my line, but the question is just if somebody discovers an HIV cure, who do they tell, and will they be given a reward for it?
Ah, wow, that's a really difficult question. I think that obviously, if somebody claims to have an HIV cure, it has to be clinically tested. The only way to really prove that somebody has a cure is if there is a clinical trial that shows that the intervention is working. And that will be public knowledge because that person will have to apply for an ethics committee in order for that study to be approved. And there is an ethical obligation for that person to release the results of that cure. So if somebody happens to claim that they have a cure on the side somewhere, they are definitely not telling the truth because we, as the general community, have no way of proving that, in fact, they have been able to develop a cure. The only way that somebody can really have a truly proven cure is if they do a clinical trial that is public, and the results as part of that clinical trial are released as part of the ethical obligations of the researcher to release the results of that clinical trial. So what I'm saying is that if somebody really truly does come up with a cure, we will know because it will be public knowledge. The clinical trial will have to be public, and the results will have to be released publicly so that it can be evaluated with all the available scientific evidence.
And I really have to read this one from Richard, who says, hopefully any scientist involved in discovering an HIV cure would have a better chance of winning a Nobel Prize than the current US president, which is something else altogether. All right, thank you so much, Prof. I'm sure there'll be other questions.
Well, or alternatively, they might have to get the FIFA. I don't know whether there's a FIFA scientific prize, but
definitely something at the very least. All right, it's my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Gabriela Cromhout, who is going to speak to us about some of those challenges, opportunities in the quest for an HIV cure, especially here in Africa. Gabby, the floor is yours.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to share the slideshow now. Can you see it, Anna? Can you just let me know?
Yes, we can see your slide. Yes.
Okay, great. So again, thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm really excited as a medical doctor and a researcher in pediatric HIV cure. I'm really excited to kind of speak about whether a cure will come from Africa and some of the considerations, challenges, and opportunities that need to be considered when we're thinking about this quest for an HIV cure. So I'm probably sitting about 100 meters away from Prof. Ndung'u, just across the road at the hospital. So I'm also based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And I am the clinical coordinator for the Ucwaningo Lavantwana study, which is a study of children who are treated very early for their HIV. And we have followed these children going forward. And I'm not going to speak too much more specifically about our cohort, but I just wanted to introduce my role in terms of HIV cure. Okay, so before we go any further, I thought it was very important to clarify some terms that I and perhaps Prof. Ndung'u might have used as well. So I think we all know what HIV stands for, but if I speak about ART or CART or ARVs, that is antiretroviral therapy, and as we know, that treats HIV. And then you'll hear people speaking about ART-free remission or post-treatment control or ART-free durable control. And this is control of HIV in the absence of ART or ARVs. And the post-treatment control is after having originally been treated with ART and then stopping and being able to control. Then an ATI is an analytical treatment interruption. I'll speak a little bit more about that later. BNAB, so these are broadly neutralizing antibodies. So this is a kind of immunotherapy that is used, for example, in the FRESH trial that Prof. Ndung'u was speaking about. PLWH is people or person living with HIV. And a reservoir is the areas in the body where HIV can hide and not be found, even when the patient is on ART. And then a viral rebound is when the HIV viral load goes up and becomes detectable after a period of being undetectable. So that's just a clarification of some terms. And then I'm just going to reiterate some of what Prof. Ndung'u said when we're talking about HIV cure. So HIV cure is sort of an umbrella term for both true or eradicating cure. So that's total elimination of HIV from the body. And then what we call functional cure or ART-free durable remission or control. So that's the ability to control HIV replication without ART or ARVs. So in other words, HIV is still in the body, but it is deactivated somehow. And both of these are largely grouped under the term cure. So in terms of HIV itself, where are we now? So in 2024, there were 40.8 million people living with HIV globally. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of people living with HIV makes up 65% of the global total, who are based in sub-Saharan Africa. And 85% of adolescents and children living with HIV are based in Africa. And an important thing to note is that on the African continent, most of the people living with HIV are in heterosexual relationships, and there is also an element of vertical transmission. Something really important that we also need to mention is the fact that in sub-Saharan Africa, there has historically been a heavy reliance on foreign financial aid for funding of HIV programs, for example, through PEPFAR and USAID. And as we've seen, this has become an issue in 2025. So I just want to put in context as well the fact that we need to think about HIV and HIV cure in terms of a continuum. So it starts with HIV prevention. So before someone acquires HIV, preventing through the use of PrEP and condoms, and then moves on to if you acquire HIV, then being treated, remaining treated, and ending up with a viral load suppressed. And then for those people who have HIV, what we are all working towards now is an HIV cure. So post-treatment control or eradication. But I think it's really nice to think of this in terms of a continuum. So why do we need a cure? So we know that our ART that's available at the moment is incredibly effective at controlling HIV. But as soon as you stop ART, the virus rebounds. And this can be seen in the graph on the right. As soon as you stop that ART, you can see that red line goes up again, and that's the circulating virus. So there's some things that we can think about when we talk about reasons why a cure is important. So we know that there are big issues with stigma around living with HIV, and people who are aging with HIV also get other chronic illnesses, and that means that their pill burden getting older is really high because they're taking a lot of other medications as well, so long-term health conditions and concerns. And there's also the issue of resistance. So some HIV viruses can get resistant to certain ART. And while we have really great ART in terms of the integrase inhibitors, such as dolutegravir, which is in our TLD medication, resistance does still happen, unfortunately. So we need to be very careful to mitigate any resistance building up. And then, as this year has shown us, there are really big economic costs to providing ART, and people battle to access the medication, particularly when they're living in rural parts of, for example, sub-Saharan Africa. And then I think you would all agree with me when I say that long-term adherence and their lifelong adherence is a difficult thing for anyone. So I think it's really important to think of these when we're thinking about why we're working towards a cure and why this is important. So I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't speak about children. So my passion lies in terms of pediatric HIV cure work. So the first thing that I want to say in terms of children and HIV is that children are not little adults. Their bodies function differently, and this is particularly pertinent when we're talking about immune systems and the progression of HIV to late stage HIV or AIDS is and then death happens really quickly in children versus in adults. So around 60% of children who have been untreated, who are born with HIV and are untreated, unfortunately demise by 2 years of age. So when we're talking about how children acquire HIV, the majority of children living with HIV have acquired HIV vertically. So this used to be called mother-to-child transmission. It's now called vertical transmission. And this is during pregnancy, delivery, or breastfeeding. It can also happen horizontally through early sexual debut or sexual abuse, and it can happen through IV drug use as well. But the main thing that we focus on in terms of pediatric HIV is the vertical transmission. And so now, why would it be important to look for a cure in children if we're also wanting to cure adults? So if you have a look at this graph, this is looking at the UNAIDS estimates for 2024, but it was from the report this year. And you can see on the left in the square is the children, and these are the 95, 95, 95 metrics. And you can see versus the women and the men, which are to the right of them, you can see that children are really lagging behind. So only 63% of children with HIV know their status globally, 55% are accessing ART, and only 47% of these are suppressed on their treatment. And this then leads to a disproportionate number of deaths in these children living with HIV. So it's really important that we need to ensure that there's equitable funding and resources for pediatric HIV cure. So I'd just like to read a quote which I find incredibly moving, and it's from a young person living with HIV. And she says, "The challenges are real. Talking about my status needs a lot of emotional preparation, as stigma and discrimination are still around HIV. I still say to some of my housemates at Res, I'm taking vitamin pills when they see my pill bottles. Taking my medication and dealing with side effects is also tough. I hate taking ARVs so much. I wish there was a way to make it easier. Sometimes it feels like a constant reminder of my HIV status. But I found a way to cope. My name, Kwezi, means star. So I remind myself every morning after taking my pills that I'm a star girl. I give myself a small gesture of love and encouragement, a peck on the forehead." And I think that that is such a beautiful quote where it makes us realize just how urgent the need to develop an HIV cure really is. So scientists have been working at getting an HIV cure for many years. Why haven't we achieved it yet? So Prof. Ndung'u spoke a little bit about this, but basically HIV lays down a reservoir. And so the virus itself infects these activated T cells, which are part of your immune system, and it persists in memory T cells. So this means that as soon as there's no ART in someone's system, so if they're not taking their medication, the virus starts replicating and travels around the body and replicates more. And that's what makes it really, really difficult to cure HIV. And if you would like to ask, where is the reservoir though? How do we get to it? This is a really beautiful figure that shows us that that's really what we understand in terms of the reservoir, is that it's really in much of the body, for example, the gut, the lymph nodes, the spleen, the liver, the nervous system. And so we really have to think very cleverly to be able to find a cure that can work for everyone. So this is building on what Prof. Ndung'u said as well, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but basically ways in theory of curing HIV. We want to limit the building of the reservoir. So that means starting ART as soon as possible after acquiring HIV. Then we want to decrease the size of the reservoir if once we have HIV. So this can be through gene therapy or latency reversing agents. And then we want our immune system to be able to control that reservoir without ART. And this can be potentially through the use of vaccines or immunotherapy like the bNAbs that were used in the FRESH trial. So again, just an overall thing is that ideally a cure will both reduce and control. So there will be a low reservoir and a sustained immune response from the host. So once we're testing these strategies that Prof. Ndung'u and I've alluded to here, how do we know if someone's being cured? So unfortunately, there is no biomarker that says you will be cured, you won't be able to control. So we have to do what's called an analytical treatment interruption, or an ATI. So this is where ART is stopped under very, very strict monitoring and safety conditions. And it's often after the use of one or more cure-related strategies. So for example, Prof. Ndung'u spoke about giving the bNAbs, and then they stopped the ART a little bit later. And he also spoke about one of the different types of ATI. So you get two types. The one is a time to rebound ATI. So that means that as soon as the viral load is detectable, you start ART again. And then you get a set point ATI, which is what they did in the Fresh Gilead study, which is when you allow a certain level of virus that is safe before you restart therapy. So where are we now? So we know that Africa is the most affected of all continents in terms of HIV. But as Prof. Ndung'u alluded to earlier, we have a wealth of scientists, doctors, and researchers on the African continent who are passionate about pursuing a cure for HIV, both in adults and in children. But we now need to leverage political and public will to maintain these hard-won gains that we've made, and then to take the cure research further. And this means you, as advocates and community members, are absolutely critical in taking this forward. So I just wanted to mention some exciting HIV cure studies that are happening in sub-Saharan Africa, and this is not a complete list at all, but some examples are the FRESH study that Prof. Ndung'u spoke about, which is based in South Africa. Then we have 3 studies involving children who are treated very early. One is the study that I work on, so the Ucwaningo Lwabantwana study, or the baby cure study, and that's based here in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Then there's the Tetelo Plus study, which is early treated children in Botswana. And then the Impact P11-15 study is based across 11 countries, and some of them are based in Africa. And so this also involves children who are treated very early. So there's some exciting stuff happening, and we're excited for there to be more as well. And then something that I think is really important is some of the considerations that we need to take into account when we are conducting HIV cure research in an African setting. So something that is pretty amazing about Africa is that we are known for our incredible interconnectedness and relationships. And that's part of the reason why the decentralized ART programs work so well in South Africa. We have these amazing community healthcare workers and community leaders who are able to connect communities in the most amazing, beautiful ways. And this is really important because we need to ensure that our communities are educated. A decade or so ago, there were still people who were unfortunately passing away from HIV-related disease. And And now we've gotten to a point where HIV is a chronic illness that is treatable. And as we move towards a cure, we need to ensure that our communities are staying with us in our movement forward. So we need to be sensitizing our communities. We also need to be dispelling any myths. And one really striking one that I've found is that around blood drawing. Some community members believe that when we draw blood for clinical trials, this blood is sold for traditional medication, and that is obviously not at all the case. But that's what's so important in terms of making sure that we are dispelling myths and ensuring that the community works with us and walks with us in terms of our quest towards an HIV cure and where we are in terms of the updated ways that we are looking at things. Another really important thing is the mobilizing of advocates and political will. And this is something that our communities are able to do. Another thing that we also need to be very aware of is the incredible work that the community advisory boards and the community advocates do as well. And because the work that they are doing now and you are doing now ensures that HIV cure research can be done and that it can be rolled out in future so that once an HIV cure is discovered, it's not going to be sitting on a shelf somewhere. We are able to roll it out in an acceptable, context-specific way. So that's how communities are so important and some of the considerations we need to take into account when looking at HIV cure research. And then close to my heart is children and adolescents. So they need their own unique set of considerations. So we need to remember that adherence to treatment relies on a caregiver or family unit in addition to the child, right? Because very often children are too young to be able to take their treatment themselves. So you're relying on the caregiver and this greater family unit. So ensuring that the family is seen as a whole and they are linked properly to care is really, really important. Another thing that's really important is the issue of HIV disclosure. So ensuring that children understand that they are living with HIV. And this is a really major issue because especially in a research setting, children need to follow a pathway to disclosure, right? And it's a difficult thing. A lot of parents feel a lot of guilt around it, and they think that their children are too young to understand. And this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about because there are ways to do it that are context specific and that are also tailored to the child's developmental stage. So, for example, you don't start off and say, you have HIV. Your child will probably come to you and say, why am I taking this medication? Like, I don't want it. I don't need it. My brother's not taking it. Why do I have to take it? And you can start there and say, well, you need to take this medication to stay healthy. If you don't take it, you will get sick. And you can start like that. And then you build and add on to that as the child develops and their maturity develops, eventually to a point where you are saying you are living with HIV. So by the time you explain that it is HIV, it's not a shock to the child. It's just that you've been adding to the story based on their developmental and maturity level. And very much linked to this is the issue of assent. So all of us have autonomy over our bodies, and so do children and adolescents. And for them to be able to assent to taking part in clinical research, they need to also understand what's happening to them. And this can be linked to disclosure because children can be fully disclosed, so they know that they are living with HIV, or they can be partially disclosed to. For example, like I was saying, they know that their immune system's a little bit weak and they need the medication, or they might know nothing. And so tailoring the assent based on what they understand in terms of their own bodies is really critical. And then children also have to go to school. And a lot of these cure research trials involve a lot of monitoring. And so we as researchers and clinicians need to be cognizant of this and ensure that a child is not, for example, missing a day of school once a week for a month. If a child is learning to write and you're missing a day of school every week for a month, you're going to be left behind. So tailoring your clinics, maybe doing them before school or after school or having Saturday clinics is something that can be done to make it more child friendly. And then I think a lot of us will know that young people need support. Just going through adolescence is a difficult thing in and of itself. And now when you are navigating the fact that you are living with HIV, in addition to being a teenager and having to take health ownership over taking your medication and understanding where you fit in the world is a difficult thing. And so we need to ensure that our clinics that service children and adolescents are equipped in terms of the necessary biopsychosocial support that is needed for these young people. Okay, so I am now going to move on to the take-home messages. So first of all, cure is possible. We just are not there yet. It will likely require a small reservoir, which can be done through early ART, and some sort of intervention with a following treatment interruption. So you might be saying, okay, great. So I've watched this webinar about HIV cure. What am I going to tell my friends? Because I told them I was watching this webinar. So I think what's really important to take home and tell community members and our families and friends is that the most important thing is regular testing so people can start treatment early. They then need to maintain good treatment adherence. Analytical treatment interruptions are not for anyone to do by themselves at home, right? This is something that's done under really strict monitoring. So don't do that at home. You need to maintain good treatment adherence as for as long as possible. And then if you can enroll yourself or people that you know, if they would like to enroll in cure trials and studies, that would be great if they make themselves available, because that helps us as researchers to take the field forward. And I'm now speaking to the advocates that are in the room. Basically, we need to ensure that HIV cure remains a priority for funders and governments alike. We need local government buy-in and accountability in terms of the HIV programs and in terms of cure research specifically. And this is something that you are incredibly good at, keeping front of mind and ensuring that this stays on the agenda in terms of our local governments. So I'd like to finish off with one last quote, and this is from a young person that we'll call Zed. And this young person says, "My greatest hope is that in the next 5 years, scientists and researchers will finally get to the bottom of the HIV cure, not just for adults, but especially for children and young people who were born with HIV. I wish for a world where no child has to take medicine every day to stay alive." And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and you are welcome to ask any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. And of course, that great reminder that children definitely are not little people. They're not little adults. They're not mini adults. And I do believe that children, I think, are one of the most oppressed classes. And every time an advocate speaks up for children, I think the world smiles a little bit brighter. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. I think because there are a couple of questions that relate to both your presentation and Professor Thumbi's presentation, we'll just hold on a little bit to it and then to those questions, and then just move on to Adaobi's presentation, and then we'll take all the questions at once. And because I see some of the questions are related to ATI, and I know they relate to both of you. So Adaobi, I'll give you the floor now as one of those advocates that are in the room that Gabriela mentioned. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Hi, Jim. I think you can just share because I'm having troubles. I don't have access to sharing from my laptop.
Okay, I can share for you, Adobe, no problem.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second. All right, does that look good to you?
Yeah, looks great.
All right, just give me
Okay,
direction. I'm here for you.
thanks, Jim. So thanks, Gabby and Professor Thumbi, for those great presentations. And to be honest, I think some of the information in my slides have been covered, so I'll just rush through the ones that have already been covered. Next slide, please. So this is just a joke that I'm not a scientist, so please direct all your questions to Gabby and Professor Thumbi. But in terms of advocacy, please throw them strongly at me. These slides were presented at IAS 2025 during the pre conference, and so I have updated them to reflect recent UNAIDS 2024 data. Next slide. So we'll be talking about community perspectives, what is an HIV cure, why do we need it, issues with ongoing HIV cure research, and then we'll end with misinformation and key takeaways. Next slide, please. And thanks a lot, Gabby, for defining the cure, and even Professor Thumbi defined the cure. So there are two broad definitions of the cure. There's the classical cure, which is the elimination of all replication competent HIV-1 from the body. We have seen this in people who have received stem cell transplant. And then there's also the functional cure, which is when people are able to suppress HIV in their body to even undetectable levels without any ART. And we have seen that in some elite controllers and other controllers. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief status update on where we are with the cure. I'm sure we have had more cases come up. I've heard about new cases of the cure, but as at March 2025, we had 9 examples of people who were considered to be cured. 7 of them received stem cell transplants, and then we had elite controllers. But the main message, like Gabby said, is we still don't have a cure yet that is scalable for all the 40 million people. We have made progress, we have seen promising results, but scientists are still working towards a cure that can work for everybody everywhere. Next slide, please. So I think Gabby really touched on this, and thanks, Gabby. But why do we need an HIV cure is the big question. We have a lot of exciting long-acting antiretroviral therapy and a lot of exciting innovations in the field now. But the reason why we still need an HIV cure is, firstly, chronic inflammation, regardless of viral suppression, has been identified as a major driver of several health challenges for people living with HIV. And Gabby mentioned as they age, it becomes even worse. There's also issues with limited access to ART, which is even being worsened by the crisis in the field, in the funding of the field we're seeing now. There are issues with side effects and toxicity related to long-term use of antiretroviral therapy. There's also the economic burden of lifelong antiretroviral therapy for over 40 million people. You know, at ICASA, I learned that for the 1.3 million people who newly acquired HIV in 2024, it will cost the response $2 billion to maintain lifelong therapy. And so think of the over 40 million people. And even above the cost of the pills, we still see the economic burden on the people living with HIV themselves, the loss of job, the loss of wages, the loss of time when they have to go to get their treatments, and every other related challenge that they face. And all this added together, including stigmatization, criminalization, and, really negatively impacts both the quality and quantity of life people, which I believe is the most important thing for them. And then there are several factors associated with the virus itself, that may impact cure strategies of hormones. There's age, there's race, different viral clades and subtypes. How will people with different viral clades react to the different strategies? There's comorbidities. Even Gabby talked about reservoir size, inflammation, and immune function. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions. A lot remains unknown. So it's important that we keep diversity considerations at the forefront of advocating for HIV research for an equitable cure. Next slide. And so for this particular presentation, I'll focus on geography and biological sex. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, so this is just showing the distribution of HIV cure research against the geographical burden of HIV across the UNAIDS geographical regions. So if you look at the left side of the slide, you see that the blue bars represent the cure research ongoing in the different geographical regions, and the red bars represent the HIV burden in those regions. So we'll see that Africa, which contributes about 66% of the total HIV burden globally, only represents 12% of the HIV cure trials that are currently ongoing. Only 12% are happening in Africa. And then we'll see Western and Central Europe and North America, which represents only 6% of the global burden of HIV, having 67% of trials being conducted there. This highlights a deep inequity. I mentioned the several diversity considerations that need to be taken into account when we're doing cure trials. And this is just telling a story that there is no balance in the geographical representation and even the people who the trials are being conducted in. And this inequity is even further being worsened by the ongoing funding crisis, with funding cuts threatening cure research across Africa and even other affected regions. Next slide, please. So if we delve deeper into this data, into the data we just saw on the last slide, seeing the representation by sex, age, we'll also see that women who contribute over 50% of the global HIV burden make up only 90% of the trial participants in ongoing trials. And we see that men make up about 80%. And this is not surprising because we saw from the previous slide that most of these trials are being conducted in Western and Central Europe and North America, which has a higher burden of men living with HIV. So it's easier to enroll men in these studies. But if we conduct more trials in Africa, we know that there is a higher burden of HIV among women. We'll be able to potentially enroll more women in trials and address the sex disparity due to the higher burden of HIV among women and girls in Africa. We can also see from this slide that even transgender people are very poorly represented, not even up to 1% of transgender and gender diverse. So how do we then answer the question of the impact of gender affirming hormones, for example, on cure strategies and other unique factors associated with transgender and gender diverse individuals? So next slide, please. So moving on to misinformation and communicating HIV cure. Next slide. We're seeing that misinformation is really a silently growing monster that is threatening the progress we have been making in community enlightenment, community education, and literacy around all these new innovations. and it threatens the investments. It's even being weaponized. Misinformation is being weaponized in some cases.
Is it me or have we lost Adaobi?
Sorry, I dropped off. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I was saying, so across various social media that South Africa has successfully developed a cure. And the interesting irony is that the headline image would always suggest that they have developed a cure. But if you read the caption, there was the right information there explaining the amount, the percentage of participants that were able to control the virus, explaining that it's still in process, it's promising results. And you also see the source there, which is a credible source. So this confuses people, and we'll know that online people don't really read, and even if they read, how many people can understand? Even me, for example, before I got into the Advocacy Academy, it was like rocket science. Cure research would always be like rocket science. So it's important that we simplify the information when we're communicating these results, when we're first sharing the results. We need to simplify it and present it in a way that it cannot be misinterpreted or misunderstood. We need to ensure that all these early presentations and exciting data that is being shared is shared in a way that cannot be misunderstood. And then we also need to train journalists, advocates, and reporters to ensure that they are able to send the right message and not just clickbait, because this is public health and it can have very serious negative implications on the cure landscape. Next slide, please. So these are some comments from Sekabo. She's a huge, really popular social media influencer around advocacy for HIV cure vaccine. And these are some of the comments she has received. People are saying that there's a cure, Big Pharma is hiding it. In fact, when the first trial results came out, people were even saying, we need to protect Professor Thumbi. They're going to kill him. He's black. He's found the cure. They are going to kill him so they can bury the cure. These are the things that are going around and they spread like wildfire on social media. So it's important that we are aware that misinformation is a growing threat and we need to always address it. Next slide, please. So this is some of the work that is ongoing to simplify the science and communicate HIV cure research. We have advocates working across various platforms, digital media, social media to get the message out there so that people are carried along as we journey towards a cure. And then when the cure finally comes, we don't see hesitancy or we don't see governments barring the use of the cure just because we were not able to communicate it well. We have the Cure series by Doreen. We have podcasts from Liberia. We have the HIV Cure podcast from Sekabo blogs. All of this work is just to ensure that we are sharing the knowledge in a way that is easily understandable and in a way that can spread across communities to ensure they are carried along. Next slide, please. So our message is to ensure that in this era of misinformation, because we are in the era of misinformation, we need to ensure that more efforts are directed towards communicating HIV cure research. We need to ensure that scientists and the community advocates collaborate more to simplify the science above conferences, above scientific meetings. We need to share this information in spaces. I've seen a lot of podcasts with Professor Thumbi, Gabi, and it's been really encouraging to see that the scientists are working closely with advocates to really simplify this message and carry the public along. And then we also need to ensure that there are global and regional cross-learning platforms to engage even with our governments, our policymakers, our decision makers. How well do they know about the cure? They will not back or they will not buy in or support something they don't know about or something they were not carried along in. So it's important that we need to ensure that they are aware, they are fully carried along on all the research and every exciting thing happening now. Next slide, please. And so these are the key messages. We cannot do it alone. The community cannot do it alone. The scientists cannot do it alone. Donors and governments cannot do it alone. We all need to work together, but we all have our different, very unique roles to play. So for the community, it's important that we keep using our voice. And I think Gabby mentioned this in her presentation. We need to ensure that we keep the scientists, the donors, the governments on track. We keep ensuring that they are still pursuing a cure because we need the cure. And then we also need to stay updated with the cure, with the research. We need to follow the science, fight misinformation. You can use your social media platforms, you can use your gatherings, you can use anywhere you find yourself that you have the opportunity to speak about what is happening. Please share the knowledge so that people are aware and then we are really preparing for the cure. And then for the scientists, it's important that we ensure balance in our trials, geographical balance, diversity across all the different considerations to ensure that the cure is equitable and works for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, age. And then we need to co-design trials with the communities most affected. I love how the fresh trials have social and behavioral research in them. It's important that we uplift social and behavioral science to ensure that the strategies we are developing align with the needs, the preferences, and the lived realities of the people we are developing them for. And then for donors and governments, it's important that we boost political will, invest in HIV cure. Um, Investing in the HIV cure research is not just limited to HIV. We have seen how HIV research has informed innovation across board. We saw an example of the COVID vaccine, which came very fast because it built up, may it potentially answer or solve the issues with the economic impact of lifelong ART treatment. So investing in a cure is not limited to HIV as a disease alone. It cuts across board innovation, discovery, and science. So it's important that our government donors know that prioritize domestic funding, strengthen regional collaboration across the continent to ensure that the infrastructure is there, the enabling environment to support scientists is there. Next slide, please. And then just in summary, that to ensure we find a cure that is relevant, applicable, and effective for the communities most affected, we need to ensure research across the high burden regions like Africa. We need to make that balance there so that we know that the strategies we are developing are effective across board. And then co-design clinical trials. I just mentioned this. Ensure diversity, elevate social and behavioral science. All these things cannot be overestimated. And then I'm going to end with a quote from Jim Pickett from the 2023 Pre-CROI Community HIV Cure Workshop. And this was during Dr. Karin Dube's session about social and behavioral science. I won't forget. And he said all the science and research will mean nothing if we develop a cure that remains on the shelf and out of reach because we did not account for the preferences and lived experiences of the end users. Next slide, please. So I'll just end with acknowledging everyone who contributed to this presentation, especially Sekabo, who co-presented this with me during the IAS 2025 Cure Pre-Conference. Thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Adaobi. And of course, a star amongst us. Thank you, thank you. That was quite a beautiful, beautiful presentation. And I know you're quoting Jim, but it also reminds me of the 2024 AIDS conference, where the key message there was that communities are experts too. And you have shown definitely that yes, communities are experts. And I know people, someone was talking about protecting Professor Thumbi was, probably talking about something else that they will do something to him if because he found a cure. But we are living in anti, anti-science, HIV denialism, and believe it, Dr. Tony Fauci needs to have private security because people are blaming him for COVID, for faking COVID. So, I know it's a joke, but we are living in a world where scientists are actually, may be in danger because of the anti-science and the whole anti HIV denialism that's currently going on. So we'll get into our Q&A. Please feel free to raise your hand and get off mute and ask your question. But I'll just start off with the ones that we've gotten already on analytical treatment interruption. And the questions really are on how do you navigate ATI, given that we really emphasize on adherence to treatment once a person gets HIV. So either Prof. Thumbi or Gabriela, you can answer that one.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. I can go first and say that obviously the message that we keep giving to people living with HIV is that you must never interrupt antiretroviral treatment. And that is generally true, except that when you do an HIV cure trial, what you're trying to find out is whether it is possible for somebody to control their virus without antiretroviral therapy. And so in that kind of trial setting, we ask people to interrupt treatment because it is the only way to actually prove that a cure intervention works. However, it has to be done in a very, very, under very stringent conditions. It has to be, the protocol has to be reviewed by the ethics committee, by the community advisory board. The community has to be consulted, the study participants, and there has to be a predetermined criteria that guarantees all the regulatory bodies that, in fact, this study will be done safely. So, so this is not an easy kind of study to do, but it can be done safely with very close monitoring in order to prove a cure. And remember also that when somebody interrupts treatment and when they have viral load, there is also the risk of transmission of the virus to somebody else if they have unprotected sex. So all those factors have to be considered so that we can see how do we do this safely as possible, but also gain as much knowledge as possible about what works and what doesn't work. So I think it's trying to balance that tension, and there is a way to do it. And that's why we had that workshop in Nairobi to kind of discuss how can we do that in a way that balances protecting the participants and their partners, but at the same time, we learn from these kind of studies so that eventually we will have a cure. So just to summarize, it is possible to balance that, but it has to be done in a very and a very close monitoring in a clinical setting. So this is, as Gabriela mentioned, this is not something you should do on your own at home. It has to be within a study, and it has to be very closely monitored.
And maybe before Gabby comes in, there's a follow-up question on this one as well that says then how do the clinical trials protocols optimally define the therapeutic line positioning, the interruption followed by resumption of ART to mitigate the risk of antiretroviral drug resistance for ensuring that participants experience cure failure that experience cure failure can immediately then reintegrate to the safest and most effective therapeutic line for their long-term management.
So when you look at the drugs that we use to treat HIV, there is something called a therapeutic tail. And that's how long the drug stays in the system, in your blood, after you interrupt treatment. And the drug needs to have a short tail. In other words, it should be eliminated as soon as possible from the body, because what you don't want is to have some kind of suboptimal exposure of the virus to the drug, because that's how drug resistance develops. So if the person is taking the right antiretroviral medication, that tail, therapeutic tail, will be very short. And so there will be no risk of developing drug resistance, or the risk will be very minimal anyway. And for example, in the FRESH study, we tested for the development of drug resistance, and not a single person developed drug resistance, because once we interrupted treatment, there was no, the drug therapeutic tail was very short, so there was no risk really of developing drug resistance. So there is a way that clinicians and scientists can make sure that when the antiretroviral drug is interrupted, there is no chance of developing drug resistance, or at least you minimize it as much as possible.
All right. Thank you for that. And looking at our time, I'm hoping, Jim, with your guidance, we can take care of a couple of questions, maybe two,
Oh
three
yeah.
more questions. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
let's tidy things up. We can hang out as long as the speakers can hang. We won't go forever, but let's make sure we get these comments and questions addressed. Thanks, Anna and everybody.
all right. Gabby, would you like to come in with on ATI, particularly as it relates to children as well? Because I know you're really passionate about advocating for children.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And I think we were really lucky in our study because we are based in KwaZulu-Natal, and so the communities, because of studies like the fresh cohort, the communities were already aware that things like ATIs existed. So there was a lot more community awareness around these things happening. Obviously, with children, there's a lot more fear and a lot more skepticism around safety. And it's a complicated thing to navigate. And I think what's really important is you have to individualize the path for each child in terms of the ATI. And I mean that in terms of your biopsychosocial support. Because some people are super excited to be off of treatment and not have to give their child treatment for however long. And some parents have been incredibly strict about giving every single day at exactly the same time every day. And they end up getting incredibly anxious about it. So, you have to be very patient-centered and person-centered when you're dealing with these situations. So another thing that I wanted to mention as well is the ATI consensus meeting. I saw someone commented in the chat about, how do you handle this in a place where, an ATI is perhaps illegal, where HIV is criminalized. So I'm going to take a slightly different slant to that, because there were, for example, in the Impact P1115 study, there were some of the sites where the ethics review board said, nope, we're not doing any ATI, not safe, we're not going to do it, right? And I think, there have been enough ATI studies now in children. We've shown that they can be done safely. They can be done on the African continent, right? In what was previously deemed to be a lower resource setting, and it's been done safely, and these children are doing well. So I think it's really important that this ATI consensus workshop happened, because once this publication comes out, that can then be taken forward to communities and to your ethics boards and say, this is what the experts in the field this is their consensus right now. This is where we are going. And if we want to, as a country, as an institution, want to be at the forefront of taking this forward, this is how we do it. And I need to just also reiterate the fact that every aspect of safety and monitoring is undertaken, especially even more so in children. So these children are safe and well monitored during these. And then I also wanted to just add something else to what Prof. Ndung'u said in terms of the potential resistance. I think we're living in an incredible time now where we are using integrase inhibitors, so our dolutegravir, and dolutegravir especially has a really high barrier to resistance. So that means that HAIs can be done even more safely than perhaps they could have been done 5-10 years ago. So I think the safety of it is improving, and nothing can ever rule anything out. But I think it's really great that we are moving to safer ways of doing these things. And yeah, I mean, right now this is the way that we know how to test for a cure. And, perhaps in 5 years' time, we will have discovered a biomarker that can say this person's going to cure like this, that one can control like that. And then we'll be in a totally different situation. But yeah, for now, ATIs can be done safely. They can be done in resource limited settings with the right planning. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. I can go on about it for a very long time, but
All right, thank you for that. Got a question as well from Elizabeth Zahabu. Elizabeth, thank you for the comments. The first one is talking about what we need right now to make research happen in more countries, and I think it has been partly covered. But I think the more important one is about the money. Where are we getting the money to do this, or where are we going to get the money? Because we know there's been all these cuts in funding and all these things.
So I think actually Prof. Ndung'u is probably one of the better people to answer this. I think he spoke really, really briefly about, for example, the Sante network. But I think what's so amazing about Sante is the way that they have diversified their funding. So it's not coming from just the US or just the UK. It's coming from a multitude of places that include donors on the African continent. And I think we need to be working towards that. And I think we also need to have buy-in from our local governments. As I said in my talk, I think it is critical. And again, this is a big advocacy point. We need to buy into our own countries and our own programs so that we push this forward. So yeah, I don't know, Prof. Ndung'u, if you have a bit more to add to that.
I think you put it very well, Gabby. I think but the only one thing that I need to probably emphasize is that there is money in Africa. And I think that if Africa is, compared to other continents, you can argue that we have less money, less resources, and that is true. I'm not denying that. But if we decide that there are certain things that are a priority for us, like solving the problem of HIV/AIDS, then we need to invest in that particular problem. And I would like to ask, because I know that a lot of people participating here are young people, we need to be advocating with our governments that they need to put money in the right places for the right things. And I cannot think of a more important problem in Africa than HIV cure. So we need investment in HIV cure. Yes, we are getting money from overseas, from the Gates Foundation. We have received money in the past from the NIH, although that is diminishing now. But we need to get money from our own African governments. And South African government has, by the way, been very good at this. For example, for the funding that was lost from the NIH, they are now replacing some of that and funding HIV programs directly. And I know some people in Botswana also who have received money from the Botswana government. So I think we are beginning to see a change And we need to see more of that, including philanthropy, private people who have money in Africa to really realize that this is our problems and we need to come together to solve this problem. So I would like to call for more investment and more advocacy for investment in this kind of work in Africa from our own governments and from our own philanthropists as we look for money elsewhere as well.
Right. And last one from this end, the question of collaboration with indigenous African knowledge systems and African knowledge practitioners. Is there room for that in HIV cure research?
I believe I believe that there is because again the way the progress that we have made in the fight against HIV is because of partnerships and mutual respect. So we need to respect people who, for example, go to the traditional knowledge systems in order to address problems of HIV. So not everything is medical. Not every problem is medical. But we also need to make sure that whatever we say about traditional knowledge systems, that they are also subjected to rigorous examination so that people are not going after things that don't work or that people are promised about solutions that really don't work. So I think we should work together, but where there is a solution, for example, an antiretroviral drug that we know works, then that's and has been proven scientifically to work. Really, we have to go with that. But that's not to discard that traditional knowledge systems cannot be used because, as we say, HIV is not just a medical problem. There are also social problems associated with HIV, and not everything can be dealt with a pill or with a drug. So we need all these systems, including traditional knowledge systems, to come into play to help people living with HIV to address this problem, including actually searching for a cure.
Great stuff. Thank you, Prof. I know some take-home messages have already been shared in the presentations. So I'll just take at this point in time, say thank you to our three speakers. Also, a very big thank you to Jessica Sauswedel, who behind the scenes has been working very hard to pull all of this together with us. And a very big thank you to Jim, of course, without whom this would not have been possible. And I'll hand over to Jim and to everyone, of course, for coming through. Thank you so much. Bye, Jim.
Thank you so much, Anna. Beautiful moderation. This was a fabulous webinar. What great speakers. Thank you so much to Thumbi, Gabriela, and Adaobi, who looks like she just fell off. Although, Adaobi, if you are here, I was going to give you a chance to have a last word, a parting word. So if you want to come off mute, you can give a parting word. But 1 second, I'll let you have the last word. I'll just give some logistics to remind people that we will be posting the recording and the slides that are not that don't include unpublished data. And you'll all get an email when those things are available. So within the next day or so, everything will be online and you can go and revisit. Plus, there'll be a resource document with some of these great resources that have been shared in the chat. But I said I was going to give Adaobi the last word, so I'm going to turn it over to her to send us out with some powerful advocacy messages.
Thanks, Jim. I'm just going to quote Gabby and Professor Thumbi. You know, Gabby mentioned that a cure is possible. That's one message we should go home with. We're still working on it. We haven't found it. It's possible. Cure research is also possible in Africa. But as Professor Thumbi said, we need to ensure that our governments invest in cure research in Africa because we have resources. We need to invest. A cure research is very important. Health is a very important health issue for Africa, and we need to prioritize HIV cure research. Thank you.
Thank you, Adaobi. Thank you all for being here, and we will see you in the new year. Take good care of you and yours. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.